Okay, let's get started, and for this first section we're going to be talking about major paper layers, and for that I'm going to start with a sketch to illustrate how I'm going to walk through this process. And it's something that you can apply to any sketch or any design that you are working with. It might be something that you just see in your mind. It might be a layout that you like and you're using your own version or creating your own version in a scraplift kind of way. Absolutely anything. But what I wanted to show you with this sketch is that a sketch can give you basic outlines of all the different elements on the page. And as you look at this page, in a sketch form, there's not a lot of layering that's obvious. But I'm going to take you through the process of making this layout in a very layered style. So it starts with two photos, one portrait and one landscape. So I have those here, and they are just a little bit off of 4x6. They were 4x6 with a little bit cropped down because they weren't taken on an SLR that had that 4x6 format. So just a little bit different. And this one is a little bit of a confusing photo. It's actually a reflection. So the horizon line is here, and this is sky, and this is well, kind of a flooded parking lot, essentially, but there's more story to that, I promise. Okay, so I'm going to be starting with those photos, and I've collected my papers that I'm going to start with. Now, if I look directly at the sketch, I have one paper for the 12x12 background, one for this large box that creates a mat around these three elements here. Those two are the photos, so I don't need any more paper for those. And I have one block of paper here, so that's three layers, or three different papers that I need. Something to represent this circle up here, and then I have my areas of embellishment. But I've actually assembled far more papers than just what's counted up there. So I have this color scheme of teal, yellow, and gray, and I'm going to be using 6 patterned papers. They're all just one color at a time, barring one. This one has both the teal and the yellow, but other than that I have two yellows and two grays, and then one more with the teal. And then I have some different accents. One whole 12x12 cut apart sheet that I haven't cut apart yet. That's from Cosmo Cricut. And this one from Keezy Art, which was part of a cut apart sheet, but I've already cut it apart, and I've just gone to the one that's aqua and yellow that's going to coordinate here. I'm going to start with this faded yellow diagonal as my background, so I'll just be cutting the branding strip off this page and building everything else on top of this, but I'm going to be layering the different elements that are seen here, like this large paper box that's going to mat the photos. In a design like this, which has a mat around the photos, I find it easiest to go ahead and start there and build from that point. So I attach the two photos in the same way as the sketch to a neutral in the color scheme. So in this color scheme I have gray, teal, and yellow. The turquoise, or the teal, and the yellow are the two more vibrant colors, and the gray is the neutral. So it's easier for me to mat the photos with the neutral color, because then I have that little bit of a border between the coloring of my layout and the color that's represented in the photos, because I don't always take the color scheme directly from the photographs. Now, there is a little bit of yellow in these photos, and there's certainly plenty of gray. There's not turquoise, but I'm adding that in. Oh, I suppose there's a little bit of a kind of turquoisey blue here, but it's certainly not a large element of the photos. That's just my addition for the page. So this gray neutral gives me that little barrier around the pictures that will make it easier for the colors of the layout to work with the colors of the photo. And then from here I start to look at something that's essentially a nested shape, or graduated shapes. So I have three different layers of paper, one with the bolder color and then another neutral. But that could be another vibrant color. It's just here. What I want to avoid is my colors of the layers being next to each other. So if I had backed this with another yellow pattern paper, then you'd end up with the yellow on yellow, and that's not particularly the look I'm going for. You can do great things with tone on tone, where you use all the papers in a monochromatic way, and really make a statement out of it, but then you need to devote more layers, not just 2 yellows, but maybe 3 or 4 yellows at least, to start making a point that you did that on purpose, as it were. In this case, I want to vary the colors, so I'm not going to have my yellow touch a yellow layer and a turquoise touch another turquoise layer. And a little bit of overlap here or there is fine, but the major elements here, I'm trying to vary it a little bit. So I have gray, turquoise, gray, yellow. And when I first started scrapbooking, it was very popular to line up your mats like this, so everything was nice and straight and orderly and tidy. We didn't use a lot of pattern paper, so it tended to be 2 different colors and a white, or maybe a black if you're doing something that that was a little bit of a darker color scheme. And then everything always tended to look very formal because you were taking a special photo and you were matting it several times, which is the same sort of thing as when you take a formal portrait and you frame it with several mats to go on the wall. It looks very formal. It has that dimension that you get with the multiple photo mats, where it looks almost kind of like it's in a box, as it were. And the formality of those sorts of pages, when I started scrapbooking, a lot of the photos we were using, because this was pre-digital, and they were all very special portraits or special pictures in some way. We weren't doing a lot of scrapbooking with everyday moments. And now most of my scrapbooking is with everyday stuff, and I don't want it to seem like every single page is really, really formal. I want it to seem more like these are just small snippets of everyday life, and that way, because of that, I tend to change the way that I use my mats, and that's to set everything at just a slight angle and make this have a more informal feel. So by offsetting the papers by just a degree or 2 really small angles, it makes it look more like it was a little bit haphazard, a little bit less regimented, and that's what I prefer. But if you want formality, then you'd want to make sure that all of those mats are nice and square. Now from here, I know that I'm going to be working on this top edge, because if you look at how I've placed the 2 photos and this little piece of the cut apart card, I've paid attention to the inside spacing here, called the gutter, and it's the margin in between all these interior elements. And because I've gotten these 2, so these gaps are the same, the gap between the 2 photos is the same between the gap and between the photo and the index card, I have more space here, because this is a little bit too small to fill that gap. So what I'm going to be doing is adding another element on top of this, so that that spacing change is not as obvious. It's always easier to add from the outside to even up this space than it would be to come in and fix something in the center, because I then end up needing to bring in embellishment or something to the middle of all of the photos, and there'd be a lot of overlapping going on that could distract from the images. Always easier to work from the outside rather than try and get rid of space that's created a gap in the middle of the design. As you move around the different elements of the sketch, you can vary the way you treat the edges, and you can choose which pieces you'll add layers to and which ones you won't. So here, all of the edges are exactly the same. I haven't punched or distressed any of the edges. They're all straight. They're all about the same ratio of rectangle. They're just slightly offset on the angle. But when I get to this round element at the top, instead of just repeating that same process, I'd like to give it a little bit of variety. So this time I've cut 1 plain circle and 1 pinked circle, so that when I stack them up on top of each other, I not only have the layered effect, but I also have that different edge that's going to give that a little bit of variety from everything else that's already present. Now, as far as tools go for a layered style, if you use a manual die cutter, then sets of dies like this are really useful, because you can take the shapes that you use most often on your pages and you can cut them in a variety of sizes. I particularly like these 2 where I have the plain and the pinked, because then I can put them together. So there are different sizes in the set that then will coordinate so that I get the pinked edge around the circle. And you can make all sorts of layered embellishments by just cutting more and more pieces and layering them together. But if you don't use a manual die cutter and prefer to use an electronic cutter like a Silhouette or a Cricut, then you can of course take one shape and cut it in a variety of sizes to get the same effect. And if you don't use a die cutter at all but prefer to cut everything by hand, just look for different templates. You can get an artist template that has circles in all different sizes. You can draw them out, or you can use your printer to print just a piece of normal typing paper with circles of all different sizes and use it as a template. There's all sorts of different ways because it's certainly a little bit more challenging to get your circles lined up than it is a bunch of rectangle boxes. So I'm going to be placing this behind here, and this is another thing that I find really useful with layering, and that's that my adhesive is never flush with the edge. I know there are some scrappers who prefer to use a really long run of tape that will go all the way around each side and will keep things like this from happening. You would never see this in their albums where there's an edge here that's actually up off the page. That's fine, and it's great for keeping things really secure. What I don't like then is that I can't move things underneath, and the way that I scrapbook, I'm always adding layers underneath other elements. So I always adhere not quite in a long strip. I just do spots, and I always keep a little bit away from the edge so that it's easy for me to pull things up. And say I'm working on this layout and I decide that this is just too much up, or it looks like it's not going to hold securely, I can always go back and add more adhesive. It's not a problem at all. So here I have the choice of at which point I'm going to tuck this underneath. If this spacing was the same as all of these, I could tuck it underneath here and have it look like it's just tucked into this piece. But because this edge is not the same, I'd rather be able to bring in something else that's going to cover this edge. So I'm going to pop it underneath all of these layers and then adhere that there. Now, I do find with all these little angles, it's useful to keep some elements nice and straight and even on your page. So in this case, the elements that I've tried to keep straight are the photographs, so that even though the mats are a little bit offset, the photos themselves are straight on the page. And then I'm looking at things that will catch your eye straight away, like the brick pattern here with that harsh edge of the next layer. I want to keep that straight because otherwise it's going to jump out at your eye a little bit more so than just the naturally angled elements elsewhere. Now it's time to start looking at how I'm going to incorporate the other really important elements. I like to include the title and the journaling before I start layering on the embellishment, because it means that I won't run out of space and then have to compromise the story that I wanted to tell. So I'm going to go ahead and follow the design of the sketch and get my title up here in this circular space and my journaling in this box here. This box may not have room to include all of my journaling, so I'm thinking I might just add a few notes here and use this open space at the top for some lengthier journaling. Remember with the paper elements, I said I didn't want to place my yellow on top of my yellow paper, and I wanted to use the different colors to separate out the different items on the page. Well, that's true to a point, but there are other ways that I want to include the colors next to each other, and that's why I don't try to match all of the shades perfectly when I'm assembling my different pieces for a page kit. If I used all of the turquoise pieces all from the same collection, it's quite possible that they would all be in the same saturation. So by having slightly different color tones, I can place a darker turquoise, like these letter stickers, on top of a lighter turquoise in what's printed on the pattern paper, and it will still be legible. I want to do the same thing with with some smaller letter stickers in yellow, but I want to take care of this little bit of spacing that's bothering me, so I'm going to use some washi tape for that. Now, this yellow washi tape looks like a measuring tape, and although that seems perhaps a little random in looking at the photos on the page, it actually does relate to what's in the photos a little bit, because it the journaling talks about how this was supposed to be a dress rehearsal, but it was raining so much that we weren't allowed to take all of the costuming outside, so part of our costumes were kept indoors for safekeeping so we wouldn't ruin them in the rain. So because that's in the journaling, and there was definitely a lot of use of measuring tapes in the costuming process, then it all seems to work out in my mind as a little bit linked. Now, what I wanted to do here is to cover up the the gap in the spacing here so it's not so obvious, but to leave a little bit, not to cover this whole thing, so that it does still show that that mat goes all the way around. Because I've now put in this element that separates it, you're not going to notice as much unless I point it out, like I am right now, that this space is not even with this one. And then I'm going to add my small letter stickers, and again I'm going to be doing a color on top of the color, but this time instead of depending so much on the shades of the yellow, although they are a little bit different, I'm also adding dimension into the mix. So I've put a pop dot on the back of each of these letter stickers, and that will help them be easy to read on top of the yellow, even though those two colors are there together. I'm also making sure that these letters bridge the gap between several different layers, and that helps bring your layering together on a page and have it feel cohesive and like it's all meant to be there. It emphasizes the layering at the same time as making it just a little bit more purposeful and connected, because you don't want your page elements to feel like they're all different pieces that don't belong in the same whole project. But this way they should. And I know that I'm going to include some more journaling up here, but I have plenty of space for that because I'm not intending to put any embellishment up here, and there's not any embellishment at the top of the page here in the sketch. So I can go ahead and start my embellishment following this plan and include those layers, and I can come back and add this journaling at any point in the process. In case I want to start looking at creating 3 embellishments that are layered and include a lot of the same supplies, not creating 3 that are vastly different, but 3 that are quite similar. I want to start my embellishment with something that's going to mark off a place on the layout for each of the embellishments. And I quite often do that with washi tape. It gives me a horizontal line that can create a grounding spot for embellishments, which is useful, and it also just gives you a way to bring everything together, because this tape, just like the tape that I used before and these letter stickers here, can cover multiple layers of what you have on your layout already. Now this is a very concentrated shot of the turquoise. I'm going to be covering quite a lot of it up with each of the embellishments, but I like the idea of having something that's similar but quite different at the same time. So in here I have all this empty kind of black space here at the bottom of the photo, so I don't mind running the tape onto the picture, but if this corner of the photo were something I really wanted to keep intact, then I wouldn't run it over the embellishment. Find a way to tuck it into the edge, and that's absolutely fine. And then the last spot on the layout for the embellishment according to the sketch is that bottom corner, and that will work fine with these photos as well. So I add a little bit of the tape there. Then I've prepared 3 each of a variety of different pieces. I think I'm going to run this quite low here, and then I'll bring the rest of the embellishment up over these layers. So I have 3 each of different things. I've done some punching where I have some labels from the gray pattern paper, some circles from the other yellow pattern paper that I hadn't used yet. I've stamped some little hearts on the cut apart Cosmo Cricut sheet that was the same collection as the background paper. Then I also have small pieces that I can use throughout. I have some gems in turquoise and a variety of buttons in gray, yellow, and turquoise. So I start with larger elements and work toward the smallest elements, and I'll be stacking things as I go. So I'll start with this piece, for example, and I'll take this larger label and move it around to see what's going to be the best position for this label, knowing that I'm going to top it with this circle. And what I want to do is bring all of this in together, but still make it obvious that this tape continues behind the label. So that's going to be my placement. It's going to show just a little bit of the tape along the edge, and it's going to have a little bit there to the side. And then I can add my circle on top of that. Now, different page elements, you may want to add some dimension. So in this case, I'm going to try it with a pop dot that's going to pick that up and make it a little bit higher. I need a little bit more of that adhesive there, but I just wanted to give it a try, so I used one for now, and then I can put some more pop dots behind there. Now this way my circle is covering the label and the tapes and a little bit of the paper layering there, but I have a little bit too much gap here. I'd rather it overlap right onto this turquoise paper if possible, just a tiny bit. So I'm going to move it just a little until I get a placement that I'm happy with, and then I'll repeat this same exercise in the various spots of embellishment on my page. So here I want the embellishment to go off the edge, and the circle is probably going to need to go off the edge as well. But with building embellishments that are going to go off the edge of the paper, I just build them and as they would be, even if this space is running off the edge, and then I'll cut everything off once it's all built. But the only thing to keep in mind are the types of embellishments that you can't cut. So for example, I can't cut a rhinestone in half, not very easily anyway, but paper is certainly easy to just turn the layout over and trim to get that nice straight edge. And it will then feel like it was always meant to be that way. Having different elements go off the edge can sometimes help your layering. If you're stamping a pattern, for example, if you were to stamp the pattern to create your own pattern paper and have the design only in the center, you end up with this white frame around the edge. It looks like it wasn't meant to be that way. And so it's easier and more pleasing to the eye if you can bring it in so that it looks like it was supposed to go right off the edge of the page. So I'll add some more pop dots to make these yellow circles secure, and then I'll start adding in my other pieces here so that I can bring in the small pieces to make each one a little bit special. As I start to add the remaining pieces, I start to look if things should be centered, offset, or at an edge. So if I were to use the heart right in the middle of the circle, I would say that that circle is a little bit too big for the heart, or I needed a larger heart stamp to use the space as a central piece. I tend to imagine this sort of thing like a Superman logo and how the S expands to fill the whole space, even though it's not how we would normally write the letter S. So in this case, I would expect the heart to be a little bit bigger to help it fill that space. So the center is not going to work perfectly well, and I only have one of these, so I can't offset it to create a little shape, which I'm going to do with the rhinestones in just a minute. So instead, I start looking at the edges, and you'll notice I've placed these two so that they are on the edge of the circle, and they go over the layers so that you can see both the yellow and the gray behind the heart element. Here I want to use it to bring together all of these layers, so I want to place it on this edge so that I can get that heart even bringing it over toward my title and onto that turquoise pattern paper. Now I've added pop dots to the hearts as well. You can go ahead and add your next layer flat on top of a popped layer, and you can just experiment to see what the dimension looks like and how you like it. And sometimes if you end up with a piece that wants to fall, you need to go back and add a second pop dot because it might be hanging over the edge, so it has different layers. The ground isn't even, basically. And you can just continue to add more pop dots underneath if needed. And you can add different elements that are flat, but what I tend to do is if I'm going to stack up quite a few things, then I'll alternate a flat layer and a popped layer. But if I'm just going to add a few things like this instead of a big stack, then I'll go ahead and add pop dots behind two elements. That's not going to be too much height. It's going to be just fine in my album. Plus, I have dimension that's going to come in the form of these rhinestones, which are not flat, and the buttons, which are not flat. So it helps to have some height in the other elements here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and place these buttons first because they're a little bit larger than the rhinestones, and I find that it's easiest to go from largest to smallest when I'm stacking up these different embellishment groupings. So I want to separate my buttons so that I have one large and one small in each grouping, and also that I have one set of each color. So I have a turquoise and gray, a turquoise and yellow, and a gray and yellow. That should work. And then I can space out how these will be placed. Now, I really like my buttons to have stitches through the centers. I'm not a big fan of buttons that just look glued on the layout. I know that plenty of people are not bothered by having the spaces left open, and if that's you, then go ahead and add glue to the back and just stick them straight onto your page and you'll be absolutely fine. But I don't like the unfinished look of having them without stitches. So ordinarily, if I were just placing them onto the layout, I would go ahead and just tack them in place with glue, and then I would stitch them to the page with a needle and thread. But if I were to stitch onto this piece with all the pop dots and everything else, I'd not only wreck my needle with a ton of glue from going through that dimensional adhesive, but I'd also just end up flattening out the different pieces, because the stitches would, it would be really easy for the stitches to pull the different pieces of dimension down and make it all flat, or not even pull it flat, but have it be warped or puckered or anything like that. That's just not the effect I'm going for. So I have to cheat. I'm going to stop at this point and I'm going to put stitches through my buttons without it going through anything else. I'm just looping the thread through the button itself, and then I'll tie it off on either side, either in a cute little knot or a bow on top, or just put it on the back with some adhesive, and then I'll use more adhesive to glue the stitched button onto the layout so it looks like it's stitched to the page, but in reality it's not. Now, the one I do have to be careful with here is, of course, I can't cut this button in half, so I need to make sure that I place my buttons so they're not going to go off the edge of the page in this particular grouping. My buttons are all held in place with glue dots and they're all stitched, so I'm going to move on to the rhinestones, which instead of just adding 1 or 2 to each element, I want to bring in 3 and dot them around the items that I've already added in a little triangle. So I'm again looking for the edges of the design, and I want it to look like the rhinestones encapsulate everything so that you see it all kind of in one glance. So everything kind of exists in between. Now, it does mean that some things will go over the edge, because just like I'm dealing with the edges of the circle, I'm dealing with the edges of that invisible triangle. But I'm going to do the same thing to each of these so that I have the gems around the outside edge, and I can incorporate the other elements that are there, like the edge of the tape, the edge of the paper, and just dot them around in a triangle. Nice and simple. And if your design doesn't allow for the triangle effect in the slightest, then you can also separate it out a little bit, well, not the triangle effect, but the edge effect. So say I couldn't place these on a line, I could also opt to separate all of them so they were a little bit further away. And this would be a similar effect, but my preference is to bring these pieces into those edges. And if the spaced out version is more appealing to you, then that's absolutely fine. Just be aware of that, and then you can embrace it going forward in your own style, because this is definitely not a case of where you have to follow it so that your style looks like mine. I much prefer if you took the different ideas and adapted them to your style. So I want to add my journaling and then look for any last minute layering pieces that I might want to add to finish the page. At this point, I've completed everything that's on the sketch. I've even filled in some journaling up here that didn't exist on the sketch, so I can put that aside. I know that my elements have taken over from the finished sketch, and I just want to look at finishing touches that will bring everything together. What I'm a little bit conscious of here is that I only have writing in my own handwriting up here, and there's nothing that connects it to the rest of the page. So what I'd like to do is incorporate a little bit of handwriting. And there's also something that I want to incorporate that's not on this page at all that will help it fit in with the other layouts in the album where it's going. So this particular page, all of the layouts in that album have the lettering LDN and 2012 somewhere on the page. So that gives me the perfect way to incorporate that. So I can just take my page and write 2012 somewhere else. Now I'm immediately going to the opposite corner from where it was, where all that handwriting was, because that will help bring it together. And then I can use the same stickers that I had before to add in the lettering to make this work. So I can just bring it into this little corner here. And that way, not only does the handwriting connect from the top of the page to the bottom, but this will fit in and match the continuity that I have throughout the album. And then as a last finishing touch, I'd like to do something to bring this together with all of the different elements. So there's no color up here, there's nothing going on there, and I don't want to add too much. I just want something a little bit light and easy to use. So I'm going to start with the rhinestones and treat this like an embellishment cluster and bring in 3 dotted around like a triangle. And then also a little bravery with some mist. Now my whole page is done, and I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of just a tiny sprinkling of some mist. Now I think there's nothing wrong with stopping here, and if mist terrifies you, then don't add this step at the end. I'm just going to a few spots on the page for just these tiny little droplets, and I want to put them around these little groupings of embellishment and the journaling, and that will tie in the journaling to the embellishment on the pages. And you can also cover up your photo if you're a little worried about it going onto the picture.